This episode is brought to you by Walmart. New beauty is in bloom at Walmart, and it's all about springtime radiance. From Drybar, Tula Skincare, and hundreds more available online, Walmart has the premium brands you want and this season's on-trend products for flawless, glossy hair and hydrated skin. Big name beauty brands? Check. The things you love? Check. Find trending spring beauty and all you need to look and feel gorgeous at Walmart, on app and online.
Hear that? It's SpringFest savings calling your name, only at Lowe's. Right now, get a free Select Ego 56-volt battery when you buy a Select Ego trimmer, blower, or mower. Plus, get your choice of any 2 bags of Miracle-Gro organic soil mix for only $16. Shop these can't-miss deals in-store or online today. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 4/2. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. Excludes Hawaii.
Welcome to Fortune's Wheel Podcast, and here is our first episode in a brand new series outlining the foundations of medieval philosophy beginning long before there was any sense of what we call Western today. Medieval philosophy and theology didn't occur in a vacuum. It was supported by and it evolved through the 1,000-year crucible after the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And the events of that crucifixion didn't occur in a vacuum either. It was created and maintained through hundreds of years of thought before it. Now, my intentions for this ongoing series, running parallel to our base show of the High and Late Middle Ages, is to give us a look at the thinking throughout Western history. It's so easy, and even entertaining, I'll be honest, to get bogged down in the minutiae of history. So many stories and people to learn about. So many battles to examine, so many threads to connect. But one thing history tends to leave out might be the most impactful driver of that very history. It's philosophy. People are driven by a deeper urge to understand their world and themselves. Battles are fought using designs created by these thinkers, and traditions are forged from the crucible of their ideas. These intellectual foundations shape the very framework of society, influencing laws, customs, and the way generations perceive their own place in history. Whether through the quiet study of philosophy or the fervent clash of civilizations, the thoughts of the few, they ripple outward, carving paths for the many. The philosophers, the visionaries, the rebels, these are the ones who ignite the fires of progress. These are the ones who challenge the status quo, and these are the ones who leave behind legacies that transcend their time, changing the world one concept at a time. Now, on this episode, we begin at the beginning. All of those amazing thinkers and tinkerers before a man named Socrates. We call these people the Pre-Socratics. Now, before we begin, please consider joining us on Patreon, where you can enjoy more than 20 hours of bonus content as of this recording for as low as just $1 a month. Join our growing community and help this show bring our shared story to life. Now, this is Philosophy Episode 1, entitled Foundation, the Pre-Socratics. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Socrates. The name itself is just heavy. In fact, the name is so heavy that what would become Western civilization underwent a fundamental shift in the way humankind approached its very existence when this man walked the streets of ancient Athens. Before Socrates, the world thought one way, and after him, it thought a very different way. Okay, it wasn't that simple and straightforward, but a major turning point in Western thought occurred with Socrates. Well, Socrates' death, if you want to get specific, but I don't want to get ahead of myself there. There's even a name for the period before Socrates. Pre-Socratic. I know, not very original, but hey, when have historians ever shown a flair for marketing and advertising? But the term serves the purpose just fine. All thinkers who lived before Socrates were pre-Socratic, while all those who lived after him, well, they just get to use their own names, I guess. You could refer to them as post-Socratic, I suppose, but it's not some official term. People who dabble in philosophy might look at you funny. Then again, philosophers since before Socrates have always been looked at funny, so you'd be in good company. Okay, back on track. Now, the pre-Socratic world saw their very existence in a very different way than those who lived after Socrates. But the world itself, it didn't change just because that smelly, pig-nosed nuisance was run into an early grave. The world before him still had, lightning, for instance. It had floods and bad crops. The sun rose and fell each day, and the moon followed suit each night. Seasons shifted, volcanoes thundered, flowers bloomed. As for the people, well, babies were born, and some heartbreakingly didn't make it. Men and women worked side by side to ensure families were nurtured. Wars were won, wars were lost. People told stories around campfires, and they shared food with strangers. Ships sailed from the known world into the mists of uncertainty. And without exception, people inevitably suffered from both taxes and painful bowel movements. It's just inescapable. So with all things being equal, why was the world somehow different after Socrates lived and died? So people have a funny habit of making up reasons for things when the answers themselves aren't either evident or already figured out. I'm thinking of Aesop's fables. So when the pre-Socratics looked at the world, they saw a reality permeated by the unknown. Unknown forces were behind things all around them, and without the tools and foreknowledge that science would one day provide them, they were left to create and fill in the gaps where they could. Strikes of lightning? Well, the god Zeus must be upset about something. Seasonal processions, like clockwork, well, see, for reasons I won't go into right now, the goddess Persephone descended into the underworld for 6 months to visit her husband, and after 6 months she came back up to visit her mother. What does that have to do with seasons? Easy. Persephone's mother is the goddess of things like trees and grass and crops. She's sad when her daughter leaves her, and everything dies. When her daughter comes back, she's happy again, and nature thrives in her joy. As for volcanoes, that's another god. His name was Vulcan. And those tiny points of light in the sky at night actually reminds me of a line in a song by the band Incubus that says, "I lay my head on the sand, the sky resembles a backlit canopy with holes cut in it." It's pretty awesome, right? And that's one way to look at the stars, but the pre-Socratics saw more than a backlit canopy with holes punched in it. They saw stories. They saw their history written on that canopy. And this was obviously not confined to the Greeks. The world over similarly created their understanding of the cosmos in relation to where they were. No one is an exception to this, leading us to conclude that it's a deeply human thing to do here, to understand where we are and what we are in relation to that. And see, the pre-Socratics, they were primarily concerned with explaining the nature of the cosmos and remembering their deepest histories. Making sense of the world with the limitations they had, that's a difficult task. But as the years moved into centuries, closer and closer to a man named Socrates, the pre-Socratics also tried to move beyond mythological explanations. There were flickers in the darkness, philosophically and scientifically speaking. The urge to develop a rational, systematic understanding of the world. But what really kickstarted this development was the expansion of the various Greek peoples making contact with communities even further afield than the Ionian Sea. This exposure to other people inevitably, as both trade and war naturally do, resulted in the transfer of knowledge. This knowledge certainly included mythologies and scientific breakthroughs. This brings us to the 6th and 5th centuries BC, when the pre-Socratics really gained traction. These folks really pushed long-held beliefs and sought to identify the fundamental substance to all of existence, some underlying principle, or what they called the arca. We get the word archetype from this fundamental principle. Now, men like Thales of Miletus, a man history calls the first philosopher, because he was really the first one we know of who documented his mission to explain the natural world through reason rather than myth. Keep an eye on that word reason, would you? Thales mastered the use of rational inquiry and deductive reasoning, an insanely high bar for the time. He predicted a solar eclipse back in 585 BC. Nailed it too. He was able to do that using geometric principles to measure distances and an understanding of how one can measure such things by the observation of shadows of tall structures. Things like trees, mountains, and even pyramids. Yeah, pyramids. But Thales wasn't finished yet. He introduced abstract thinking about nature and even existence itself. In his search to find that arca, that fundamental principle, he determined water to be that fundamental substance. And what does that mean? Well, first of all, he was wrong, okay, but that's not the point. Even in philosophy, as in nearly everything, it's nice to be right, but being wrong can sometimes yield far better rewards when it's all said and done. Thales noticed that water seemed to be in everything. Blood, rivers, rain, breath, the popping of wood in a fire. It's not a bad observation and conclusion, to be quite honest. He determined that water must be the fundamental substance, the thing that everything in existence is comprised of. Again, we know this is simply not true, but again, that's not the point. By Thales merely presenting one possibility, that it's possible that one substance could be at the bottom of everything, he threw the gauntlet down for future generations. Others followed Thales and disproved him, but in doing so, they practiced the same rational inquiry and deductive reasoning as Thales did. And you see the tools, mindset, and the processes of philosophy begin to be passed from one person to the next. Now, the next big philosopher we see is a man named Anaximander. And he took the ideas of Thales and others, and he presented the concept of what he called a pairon, which is his term for the boundless and undefinable nature underlying existence. Okay, well, what does that mean? Anaximander differed from Thales fundamentally. Thales pointed at water being at the bottom of everything. Anaximander said it wasn't just water, it was a range of things that make up existence, and each one was produced by this apeiron. The apeiron, boundless and limitless and undefined, was self-generating, and it contained opposites. Hot and cold, wet and dry, big and small. It was these opposites that were the reason for the world constantly changing and morphing. Well, of course, Anaximander wasn't correct either, but that's not why we remember him. Anaximander was the first to go on record as presenting this idea of infinity. The infinity is non-material, he said, but it permeates everything, and from it comes substance. Substances that then form everything around us. But everything was made up of earth, wind, water, and fire. Though these elements were material substances, again, they emerged from the non-material. And remember when I said that infinity permeates everything. That includes time itself. Time and infinity are essentially opposites. One is bound and processional, while the other is boundless and merely void of any process. The infinity is still a concept we struggle with today when we try to define things like zero, or when we think about the multiverse hypothesis, or when we dive into the quanta at the base of our existence, when we wrestle with repeating numbers in math. Seriously, that one really messes with me on a level that makes me uncomfortable, and not knowing how to even be in my own skin. For instance, you cut a circular cake into 3 equal parts. If you use the fractions, then you get a third, and your friend gets a third, and then I get a third, right? But when you use decimals, you get 0.03 repeating, your friend gets 0.03 repeating, and then I get 0.03 repeating. But when you add those up, you don't come up with one whole cake. Now, I read recently that the missing however much of cake is the bit on the knife you used, but that's just not a satisfactory enough answer for me. But see, these are the concepts that are beyond our understanding at this point. Anaximander, roughly 2,500 years ago, he anticipated later wrestling matches that people would have with metaphysics, including Christian theologians. Anaximander gave us our first idea of what might explain the origin of reality itself. We drive cars and send people to the moon, and we harness the world's entire knowledge base in the palm of our hands. And this guy wore a toga and sandals. I don't know. Now, speaking of togas and sandals, a man named Anaximenes lived alongside Anaximander. And it was Anaximenes who narrowed the focus on what the fundamental substance at the base of all existence was. Anaximenes said it was air. Air, as far as he saw it, was in everything. And it was transmutable, meaning it could change into different states of matter. Even though Anaximenes was wrong, he still represents the Greek yearning to make sense of things. For every Anaximander or Anaximenes were 20 others coming with their own hypotheses and explanations around this time. But it wasn't just the argument that air was at the base of all creation that made Anaximenes a philosopher of note, even over 2,000 years later. See, Anaximenes pushed the different states of matter thing further than others had. He argued that air could be condensed and rarefied. That is, when air condensed, it became wind, and then water, and then earth, and then finally stone. However, when air rarefied, it becomes fire. When condensed, air becomes increasingly sturdy and reliable, and able to be molded and manipulated in the vein of creation. While when it rarefies, it becomes destructive and deadly. Now, believe it or not, this idea pushed philosophy forward a great deal, especially since Anaximenes used a touch of scientific thinking here. Though obvious to us today, in his day, the fact that natural processes follow logical order rather than divine will, well, that was revolutionary. Possibly most importantly, Anaximenes got people thinking about what can be measured and observed. You begin to see the two camps forming here, don't you? Anaximenes focused on the tangible, measurable, and manipulatable, while Anaximander offers us the idea of the intangible, immeasurable, and unmanipulatable. In my own notes for the show, I wrote the following: Anaximander and the boundless nothing, and then right next to it, Anaximenes and the bounded something. I don't know. If that helps you, there you go. This stuff isn't easy. So heading into the 400s BC, existence was pretty much split. Was Anaximenes correct, or was Anaximander correct? Was the universe measurable and observable, or was it something we will never be able to fully understand, or even observe? And along came a man named Heraclitus, and Heraclitus had a few contributions to the pre-Socratic view of the universe. But seeing his ideas at 30,000 feet, Heraclitus gave the world one central idea that seems utterly elementary to us today, but make no mistake, this changed the game completely. Heraclitus argued that the universe itself was in constant flux. Change was everywhere, and change was in everything. The universe was chock full of different base substances, and they were all constantly vying for supremacy. The fundamental nature of existence, he argued, was based upon two things: tension, conflict. The introduction of different base substances, or archaea, marks a pivotal shift in that people began to see existence not as simple as they once did. The universe being made up of just one thing, and from it, everything springs forth. See, after Heraclitus, the world was far more complex and nuanced, and let's be honest, interesting. I mean, come on. If there's one thing humans love, it's tension and conflict. The nightly news, gossip, conspiracy theories, Twitter, or X, whatever you call it anymore. See? More tension, right? The point is, Heraclitus gave people a new idea to chew on. He's most famous for the analogy he put forth about the universe being in constant motion and change. Close your eyes and imagine standing on the banks of a fast-moving, but still not dangerous river. Your pants are rolled up to the knee, and you're skipping rocks, trying to get to the opposite bank. You step into the river to grab another small flat rock. You spend the next 10 minutes trying to get that perfect skip until the person you're with calls you to come to the picnic blanket or something. When you step back out onto the bank, you have left the river you first stepped into. Heraclitus argued that your time in that river was gone forever. The river existed in the past the moment your second foot rose out of the water. And here's a punch in the gut. You will never, ever get that same river back. Heraclitus said, quote unquote, "You cannot step into the same river twice." Now think of the river as life itself. It's in constant motion, and your time spent in it is fleeting, like a dandelion seed on the wind. Once you're out of it, it changes. Yeah, heavy, right? But, and I'm pretty sure you understand this, Heraclitus wasn't just talking about a river. Life, existence, the universe, all of it. What he did in this one sentence introduced the human mind, at least in the Western tradition, to a deeper, more abstract exploration of process and order and chaos in the cosmos. Reality is not static. Rather, reality is governed by a constant process of transformation. And Heraclitus would influence one of the classical age's biggest brains later, a guy named Plutarch. Plutarch would use this idea and apply it to the concept of one's identity. So, stay tuned for that one. It's pretty interesting. Now, one more massively important contribution by Heraclitus was his introduction of the concept of the Logos. Now, the Logos is going to stick with us in this series for quite some time, actually, so I'd pay close attention. Heraclitus argued that this thing he called the Logos was a rational principle or order that underlies or guides the universe. He stuck with the idea that the universe is in constant motion due to the tension and conflict. But he added that beneath even all of that, there must be something that keeps this tension and conflict, all of this change, from just being random. The cosmos was not random, he argued. Even if we can't observe it and measure it, it was still there. This hidden structure was only hidden from us, but that doesn't mean it didn't exist. This unseen force that imposes order out of the chaos, he called again the Logos. And from this concept of the Logos came Heraclitus's unity of opposites. He thought, wait a second, if there was some force underneath it all, keeping change from being random, then doesn't that insinuate that this force, this Logos, also keeps things from flying indefinitely in one direction? Now, this probably makes you think of gravity, but he didn't go that direction. Heraclitus looked at opposites in the world and determined the Logos to be the force that maintains balance throughout existence. He thought about life and death. Two different states of being, right? What keeps life from going on forever and ever. The Logos also maintains death to be life's counterbalance. Light and dark? He looked at the days and determined that the universe itself was constantly balancing itself between both day and night, light and dark. Now, once lit, a candle eventually falls dark, right? War, he thought, was simply the opposite and counterbalance to peace. One sharpens the body and the mind and the community, while the other tears it apart. I'll let you determine which side is which. Now, Heraclitus was a giant among Pre-Socratics, at least in my opinion. His theory of existence being in constant and never-ending change still resonates today, quite heavily. His unity of opposites is still understandable to us even today, and his introduction of the Logos is something that wouldn't go away anytime soon. In fact, Christian theologians will wrestle with this one for centuries, all the way up to today, right? But more than anything, Heraclitus was able to mesh two seemingly opposing philosophies. He granted Anaximander's idea of infinity by introducing a governing principle that kept order in the chaos and even maintained balance throughout existence, while simultaneously expanding Anaximenes' idea of observable and measurable substances made up of everything we experience. It was an absolute masterstroke. And to think the next guy we talk about, arguably, eclipsed him. Crazy. And this man's name was Parmenides. And he and Heraclitus, they were contemporaries, though Parmenides was a couple decades younger. But Parmenides didn't exactly agree with Heraclitus. So I'll let you be the judge as to who was in the right and who was in the wrong here. Parmenides argued quite the opposite of Heraclitus. Where Heraclitus said reality was in constant flux, Parmenides said that reality is unchanging, indivisible, and eternal. In his work entitled On Nature, Parmenides' being itself is the only true reality. That anything that involved change is an illusion, a trick of the mind's processing of what it observed. And more than that, Parmenides did it in such a way that destroyed the old mode of constructing arguments. Parmenides developed the first known formal argument in metaphysics. He used pure logic instead of observation. Using his mental abilities, again, not observation necessarily, using his mental abilities, Parmenides deduced that something cannot come from nothing. He said that the senses were faulty precisely because they relied on faulty mechanisms that were easily duped by illusions of change. He stood by the idea that the only way to understand existence, one must use the only thing available to us that isn't tainted by the illusions our senses provide us. That thing is rational thought. And here's where Parmenides throws Heraclitus a bone. Parmenides called rational thought logos, which leads us to conclude that Parmenides agreed with Heraclitus when it comes to the fundamental substance at the very beginning of existence. That is, that order that brings balance. That order that brings balance was reason itself. I'm using reason with kind of a capital R there. Now, this conclusion laid the groundwork for what became rationalist philosophy, which we can just call philosophy. It is heavily influential in Athens during the time of Socrates and Plato and on and on. Rationalist philosophy arguably might have had the biggest impact on the Stoics, but again, I get ahead of myself. This distinction between what can be sensed and reality itself was another game changer, and it foreshadowed innumerable debates in subjects like ontology, epistemology, and even modern physics. Yeah, we're still wrestling with Parmenides' ideas today. For instance, physicists still can't quite find consensus on whether time and change are fundamental or if they're illusory. Again, we send people to the moon, and these guys wore togas and sandals.
This episode is brought to you by Temptations Cat Treats. Your cat will come running for the perfectly irresistible Temptations Creamy Puree and Temptations Lickable Spoon Cat Treats. The best time to feed lickable cat treats to your cat is anytime. Feed by hand for a playful moment, in a bowl for a creamy treat, or as a topper to make mealtime fun. Visit TemptationsTreats.com to learn more.
Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with a Business Unlimited smartphone plan. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second internet plan with savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
The next Pre-Socratic was another contemporary of the last few guys we've discussed, and I'd venture to say that everyone listening remembers the name, though in a different form. The man is known as Pythagoras, but he's mostly known by his famous theorem concerning the missing side of a right triangle. But I'd be willing to bet that the vast majority of you haven't the slightest idea why the Pythagorean theorem is so profound, beyond, acing those annoying middle school geometry tests, that is. Pythagoras was a philosophizing madman, to be quite honest. He dabbled in mathematics, metaphysics, and mysticism, all in an effort to unify them into one cohesive worldview. Geometry was just one piece of his body of work. This guy was a god. Okay, that's not entirely true. Here, let me start over. Born on the island of Samos, Pythagoras lived between 570 and 495 BC. And at some point in his early adulthood, he is said to have traveled the breadth of not only Egypt, but also the deserts leading to Babylon. He studied mathematics, astronomy, and the mysteries of the ancient religions he encountered. This included, legend says, the famous Zoroastrians. He eventually settled down in southern Italy in a town called Croton, where he founded his religious community. Pythagoras amassed a great number of followers, and what grew up around him was either a cult or a school, depending on who's looking at it. It got really culty when these followers, self-styled Pythagoreans, actually declared him a demigod, though he was never known to have embraced the status. Pythagoreans were secretive and they followed very strict rules, such as vegetarianism, communal living, and ritual purity. From this secrecy, wild legends erupted all around him, including him being able to talk to animals. That was one of them. He was also able, apparently, to predict natural disasters and even recall past lives. So we can add reincarnation to his laundry list of ideas. Eventually, a neighboring community got sick of living next door to the weirdos of the neighborhood, so they attacked the school and he eventually died in exile. He left no writings of his own. What we know of him comes from later sources, but his teachings persisted through his scattered followers, making their ways to far-flung places like Rome, Iberia, Athens, and even Jerusalem. So, Pythagoras, interesting fellow, right? Well, Pythagoras believed that the key to understanding reality was numbers. Instead of Anaximander's apeiron, that boundless infinity at the base of all reality from which everything else springs forth, and instead of Parmenides' boundless logos, the ordering force in the chaos of existence, well, see, Pythagoras argued that abstract, non-material entities, like numbers and ratios, well, they govern the physical world. What he did was fuse mathematics with rational inquiry to show what came to be called the harmony of the cosmos. This harmony of the cosmos was the balance Parmenides spoke of, and it could be expressed through music and mathematical proportions, thus also tying music into mathematics as well. What's more is that he based his conclusions about reincarnation on this harmony of the cosmos too, in that the soul is immortal and passes through multiple lives in an effort to keep balance and harmony among all the chaos. But above all, to Pythagoras, numbers were the fundamental reality of the universe. Everything, he said, could be understood through mathematical relationships. If it can be counted, it can be measured. And if it can be measured, it can be observed. And if it can be observed, it must be real. At least that's my interpretation anyway. So what about this Pythagorean theorem then? Where does the formula a squared plus b squared equals c squared come into play in this discussion of philosophy? See, this was far more than a geometric principle. It was a reflection of the cosmic order and divine harmony. Yeah, so you see why they don't go into the whole "why do I need to know this anyway" argument at school. Sad thing is, I'd confidently put my life savings up against a math teacher who understood this as well. So let's go ahead and break this down. First, Pythagoras was firm in his belief that at the bottom of it all, at the bottom of all existence are numbers. Okay, but they were far from mere tools of measurement. They saw numbers as sacred concepts governing nature, music, and even our own souls. And when you think about it, they're not exactly wrong. Follow me here. The Pythagorean theorem was his proof that geometric truths are eternal and absolute. Numbers, math itself being the very manipulation and the relationships between these numbers are reliable. And this revealed an unchanging order beneath the seeming chaos we observe. Now, second, this reliability provided by numbers brought about harmony in all things, even opposites. It makes sense when you think about it, actually. In our daily lives, when do we feel the most comfortable? when we know what's going to happen next, when there's a plan, when there's a structure. When we're sitting at a stoplight, we are comfortable with there being a plan for who goes when, and when the light turns green. What is the only bit of discomfort we feel? Ask yourselves why the light turns green and the vast majority of us wait a breath and look both ways before we proceed. It's not the lights that give us anxiety. Those are reliable. It's the people. Now compare your comfort level when inching up to a busy four-way stop. There's no light. Therefore, the only order present is the presumption that the people in the other three spots are going to follow the exact same rules as you. The lights, those create the order that allows us to comfortably go through existence. On a much deeper level, says Pythagoras, numbers do the very same thing. He believed in a harmony that numbers provide, and it's the same harmony provided when both the stoplights and the people at the intersection all follow the same rules, i.e., everyone crosses only when it is their agreed upon turn. Keywords agreed upon. There's a structure, right? Now, this harmony, when all of existence works in tandem to create the best possible and least destructive outcome for all involved, this harmony is what Pythagoras calls duality. Pythagoras believed in duality. Harmony is defined in one way as bringing two things that are in tension together. Therefore, numbers provided for the finite to be in harmony with the infinite or infinite, the odd with the even, the limited with the unlimited. These coexisted in harmony, adding to the balance throughout existence itself. And the right triangle provided the visual for this. A right triangle is an enclosed three-sided figure with a combination of two perpendicular line segments and a unifying hypotenuse. This symbolizes harmony in the cosmos, both mathematically and in the physical world. What's more is that the Pythagorean theorem is, to them anyway, a divine principle, an unchanging understanding of the perfect version of what a triangle is, which would go on to heavily influence Plato in his theory of forms. And also, medieval and Renaissance thinkers saw the Pythagorean theorem as proof that God had designed the universe using mathematical precision. The Pythagoreans truly believed that this perfect form was indicative of everything in existence. That is, the Pythagorean theorem is a key to understanding the universe itself. It demonstrated that numbers govern the everything in existence, reinforcing the belief that mathematical knowledge is the path to ultimate wisdom and divine understanding. And this leads us ultimately to music. Everybody loves music. The Pythagorean theorem sets up a universe governed by both reason, capital R reason, and numbers. And sound hinges on mathematical ratios. Musical ratios show the harmony in sounds and quite simply be expressed in mathematical proportions. Imagine holding a guitar string between two hands. Now pull the ends as far as you can so the string is taut. Now grow a third hand somehow and pluck that string. A note is created, right? Now, cut that string in half, pull it, pluck it, the pitch is different. Now cut it again. The sound is higher, and so on. The notes change relative to the ratio of string to its length. What's more is that the note itself doesn't change, only its pitch. And when the ratios are in harmony, the cutting in half and so on, it's always in octaves, that is, eighths. So, Pythagoras argued, music itself is governed by the ratio 2-1, meaning every note hits differently when it's made either twice as higher or half as low as the original. Our ears hear the exact same note, just twice as high in pitch or half lower. That's exactly why when you're at a kid's birthday party surrounded by family and little ones, every tone-deaf voice in the room still sings in harmony with others because, lyrics aside, Happy Birthday is still sung using the same procession of notes, just at different pitches. Push this idea just one step further, and you notice that music is also cyclical. The notes cycle through in octaves, but songs too are cyclical in nature. Hence, when we hear the same procession of notes during the first stanza as the second and third stanzas, we hear the same procession of notes, slightly different than the stanzas in the chorus, which is also repeated in the song. On and on it goes. Music, therefore, is based on these sacred concepts called numbers. Therefore, music itself is a foundational representation in our daily lives of the ordered universe at the base of our existence. Pythagoras argued, that just as music existed in the same harmony with itself as mathematics does, so too, he believed, did the soul. If music and mathematics can live ratioed harmony, then our lives can also do so. And if we do that, then we experience spiritual enlightenment. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. I mean, who would have thought, right? And now, the last two Pre-Socratics we're going to discuss, at least those Pre-Socratics that will be used in medieval Western philosophy, as that is the focused goal of this series. Well, these two are named Leucippus and Democritus. Leucippus lived during the 400s BC, while Democritus came just after him, though there was a little overlap. Democritus, to be sure, was a student of Leucippus, and though Democritus gets the credit for what would come to be called atomic theory of the universe, it might very well have been Leucippus who did some of that heavy lifting. It began with Leucippus, who proposed that everything in existence is composed of tiny, divisible things moving through empty space. If you remember from earlier, this would fly directly in the face of Parmenides' claim that reality was unchanging and motion was an illusion. What this proposal also did was introduce the concept of the void into Western thinking. That is, empty space consisting of nothing. Now later, St. Anselm of Canterbury will confront this one head on, so again, as I'll say a lot here in this series, keep that in mind. Now Leucippus' student Democritus took his teacher's ideas about tiny things that couldn't be divided up anymore, and he ran with it, changing lanes of Western philosophy, as it were. But first of all, Democritus gave these things a name, combining the Greek roots for not, a, and to cut, tom. These not cuttable things he called atoms. Next, Democritus argued that not only were these tiny indivisible things, these atoms, floating around in this void, but that they were different in shape, size, and even arrangement. And this is what gives us different substances from which to build the rest of existence up to and including the physical world. And since these atoms existed as nothing but building blocks of existence, then these atoms, when they ran their course in some manifestation or another, would simply fall back into their not cuttable form until they were used to create something else. And what does that sound like? Well, to me, it sounds like Democritus could be arguing for three things, or at the very least paving the way for future thinkers to conclude three things. First, if atoms always existed in one form or another, then it seems like an ancient precursor to Isaac Newton's first law of thermodynamics regarding energy conservation, which states that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, only transferred or transformed. Now, Democritus argued that change occurs when atoms move and rearrange, rather than, coming into being or perishing. Now, this next one and the third one seem connected, but I'll say this one first. Since atoms could not be destroyed nor created, and these atoms made up absolutely everyone, including their ethereal essences we now call the soul, then his atomic theory of the universe implies that our souls persist beyond our physical deaths. Now, through the lens of this podcast, this is kind of a deal breaker for Christians, so it's kind of a biggie to remember. And then the third one here, is he building a case for reincarnation? It's a long shot, I know, but if atoms are eternal, only their manifestations are fleeting, then would this open the door to consider the atoms that you consist of right now will never perish, only shift to another form. To be clear, Democritus did not believe or advocate for the existence of reincarnation, but his ideas could be construed that way. And honestly, this reminds me of Carl Sagan's famous statement, "We're all made of stardust." It's unfathomable to imagine how many iterations the atoms that make us up has already undergone. Who knows what our atoms were a part of before we came to be. So let's recap this whole episode, shall we? It was a ton, like drinking through a fire hose, I know. It's insane to think back on everything we've just heard. And this is only episode 1. So let's take a minute, get to the bare bones of what we discussed here. First, the Pre-Socratics were early philosophers who sought to explain the nature of the cosmos, moving away from the mythological explanations toward rational inquiry. Before Socrates, people largely understood the world through religious and mythic narratives, attributing natural events to gods and divine forces. However, the Pre-Socratics began to explore a systematic reasoning, with figures like Thales of Miletus attempting to identify a fundamental substance, his choice being water, through observation and deduction. Though his conclusion was incorrect, his method set a precedent for philosophical and scientific inquiry. Our second point, Anaximander expanded on Thales' ideas by proposing the concept of the apeiron, an infinite, boundless, and indefinable source that generates all things. Unlike Thales, who believed water was the fundamental substance, Anaximander argued that existence arose from a formless, infinite principle that contained opposites, driving change and transformation in the world. He too was incorrect by modern standards. He was the first recorded thinker, though, to introduce the idea of infinity, a concept that still puzzles mathematicians and metaphysics today. His work proved that, even in a world of togas and sandals, profound ideas about existence could take shape. Anaximenes, a contemporary of Anaximander, proposed that air was the fundamental substance underlying all existence. Now, unlike Anaximander's abstract apeiron, Anaximenes focused on a tangible element, arguing that air could change states through the process of condensation and rarefaction, becoming wind, water, earth, or stone when condensed, and fire when rarefied. Though incorrect in the final analysis, his ideas advanced philosophy by emphasizing natural processes that followed logical order rather than divine will. Anaximenes also pushed thinking toward what could be measured and observed, helping to establish a divide in early philosophy between the study of the tangible and the study of the intangible, a tension that would shape philosophical debates for centuries. Next, we have Heraclitus, revolutionized early philosophy by arguing that the universe is in constant flux, shaped by two things, tension and conflict. He was the "you can't step in the same river twice" fella, which emphasized the fleeting nature of reality. But he also introduced the logos, a rational principle that maintained order within chaos, preventing change from being purely random. And his unity of opposites suggested that existence balances itself. Life and death, light and dark, war and peace. Maybe most importantly, Heraclitus bridged Anaximander's boundless infinity with Anaximenes' focus on the observable. And we have Parmenides directly opposed Heraclitus, arguing that reality is unchanging, indivisible, and eternal. In his On Nature book, he claimed that all change is an illusion, a trick of perception, and that true understanding comes only through pure reason. What did he call that pure reason? He kept the name Logos, right? He kept Heraclitus's Logos. This shift from sensory observation to logical deduction laid the foundation for rationalist philosophy. As for Pythagoras, well, he's best known for his theorem, but his influence extended far, far beyond geometry. He saw numbers as the foundation of reality, governing nature, music, and even the soul. He blended mathematics, metaphysics, and even mysticism into a worldview where numerical harmony reflected cosmic order. To Pythagoras, understanding numbers meant understanding the universe. And finally, we come to Leucippus and his student Democritus, and they introduced atomic theory, arguing that all things are composed of tiny indivisible particles, atoms, moving through empty space, or what we call the void. This directly challenged Parmenides' ideas that reality was unchanging and motion was an illusion. Democritus also presented the idea that atoms were different in shape, size, and arrangement. These early thinkers, they laid the groundwork for a shift in Western thought, which Socrates and his successors would later revolutionize. And we will meet Socrates on the next episode. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey of philosophy. Take care.